like in preparation for the debate that I may or may not have with Lonerbox about the Holodomor, we will watch how Lonerbox discusses the topic in general with other people than me, because I've already debated genocide once with him. So let's go. Lonerbox debate, Kevin Logan on genocide. We will see if we agree on what genocide is. Let's just jump into it. It happened today. It's a very fresh thing that happened just today. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, cool.
I'll see what.
Hello, hello.
Hello there, Mr. Box.
How you doing? It's been a while.
It has been. It's been a hot minute. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine, thanks. Same as ever.
Good.
How about you?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. Not too bad.
Oh.
Yes.
This is a fresh debate, so probably nobody has reacted to it yet. I'm probably the first person to be reacting to it. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm gonna be adding my genocide expertise to it. I'm gonna be, because remember, this is in preparation for the possibility of me debating Lonerbox in the future. So we'll see. Apparently it goes a little bit wacky, but I'm going to be the judge of that.
Okay. So this is going to be a fun one. Nice, fun, breezy discussion, I reckon.
A genocidal one. Oh no. A debate between two Brits. Oh, your hair looks lovely, by the way. Oh, thank you. It is conditioned with a conditioner. Thank you. Uh, okay. I did my best. Okay, let's see. A genocidal debate. So, easy breezy, lemon squeezy discussion.
Yeah. I mean, it's not my first one, so I heard they get better over time.
Well, I don't think that's true. Anyway, yes.
Two Brits debating genocide. This is gonna be a posh one. Is this going to be a posh one? Okay, that's the last time I'm doing the British pseudo British voice.
Well, this comes from a Twitter discussion, which is rarely a good start, but I think on this occasion it might be better than most. You put out a thing on Twitter the other day about Israel and genocide, and I just asked you in passing, just as a clarification point, because I like to keep up with where everyone's at,
Alright.
whether you believe that what was currently ongoing in Gaza was genocide, and you.
And Lonerbox said no. Of course, Lonerbox will say no here. At least from what I've seen so far of his content on the subject, he'll say no. And I wonder if the topic of the ICC possibly issuing an arrest warrant, if all these things will come up in this discussion. I wonder will they even sort of frame it as to what genocide is, etc., etc. Will they go by the UN definition? Will they go by any other definition?
You said that you didn't.
Will they take a look at the Rome Statute, which is a pretty useful referential tool as well?
Think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, that might be interesting, trying to sort of tease out what's going on there. So I suppose, what's your general position then? I guess.
So I think
I believe most people in this sort of situation will say, I believe what's going on in Gaza is bad, obviously bad, but not everything that's bad is genocide. And I just don't believe it's genocide because it's bad, but it's not quite that bad. And genocide is the worst thing ever. And if we call everything genocide, it just waters down the term. I guess that's my prediction.
on October 7th, Hamas obviously did what they did. I'm not sure there's going to be much disagreement there.
I'm not sure what that has to do with the topic. October 7th. That's neither here nor there, to be quite honest, on the topic of whether or not what's happening in Gaza is genocide. You can discuss that topic. You can discuss that topic without mentioning October 7th once, to be quite honest.
And I think, as it seems to be recognized by at least most people, is that gave Israel a cause for war, at least in some capacity. Like I don't think anyone expected them to do nothing. They decided that they were going to go all the way to try and take out Hamas completely. Unfortunately, I think that means that because of how Hamas operates, that it's going to, and because of the way that Gaza is, that's going to mean urban warfare. It's going to mean urban warfare with people who don't really do that much to protect their own civilians. There's no bomb shelters. There is no distinguishing between military bases and a base where you're going to be, and houses or schools and anything like that. And you combine that with a state of Israel, which I will say is arguably, I would say, quite reckless in pursuing their military goals. I don't even know that's arguable. They are. And the result from both ends of that is that you're going to see a lot of casualties. And I don't think...
I think reckless undersells it a bit, but we'll see. We'll see where the conversation goes. I personally think that the term reckless undersells it quite a bit.
I think from Israel's side, that
a certain level of blasé. I don't know, it feels like an understatement to me.
Almost definitely means war crimes and definitely means violations of international humanitarian law, but I don't think it classes as genocide. I don't think the evidence for that has been sufficient. I think the South African case is pretty weak as I've read it, and I think most of the arguments people make in favor of it are just not really up to task. So, yeah.
Okay. What definition are you using of genocide? And I don't.
Oh, there we go. We're grounding our axioms. I would probably word it a bit differently, but I guess I'm the boring streamer. I would probably not say what definition are you using, because the reality of the situation is that all streamers use the UN definition. Like in all the online discussions, like most streamers only know one definition to begin with. Let's just accept that fact. So let's get that out of the way. Streamers don't know any other definition than the UN one. Like all streamers will go by the UN one. And it sort of makes sense in discussions because the UN definition of genocide is the one that is actually recognized within international law. And I guess it makes sense, but the question of which definition are you using is redundant here, because like how many definitions of genocide are there in streamer discourse? One. Even though I know that in academia you have more than 50 definitions of genocide, but nobody cares about those because none of them actually have any legal backing apart from that one UN definition, UN convention.
I don't really want to get bogged down in semantics too much, but presumably you do have a working definition that you're basing this on.
Yeah, just the...
Nobody goes in the streamer world by their own personal working definition. Everybody just goes by default with the UN convention. And the UN convention has its problems. It has its problems, like the it overemphasizes intent. It crosses out a few groups because the Soviet Union did not want to agree for these groups to be included. Social and which one was the other? There's the social group and political. Social and political groups were um, social and political groups were crossed out.
The UN definition, the one that's enforceable. Yeah, the one that
There you go. The UN one. Like I've said, the one that has any legal backing. That's what all streamers do. Every single streamer just goes with the UN convention.
they're using in the
Okay,
ICJ,
so
the one that historians use. Yeah.
Okay.
The one that's enforceable. Yeah, the one that they're using in the
Okay,
ICJ,
so
the one that historians use. Yeah.
Also, all historians don't just use the UN definition. Since there's 50 definitions in academia, I assume there are at least a few historians that don't go with the UN convention. Just saying.
Okay, that's fair enough. Just as clarification before we get into kind of more recent events, do you think that Israel has ever been guilty of genocide during its history, or just specifically you don't think it has been since October the 7th?
No, I don't think at any point in their history. I think the closest that I've seen is that I don't think it would be impossible to put a case against Ariel Sharon for aiding and abetting a genocidal act in Beirut in '82, Sabra Shatila. That is probably a fairly difficult one to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, but I think the indications are definitely there that he was okay with. He was definitely.
That's the whole trick with the genocidal convention and proving genocide. That's the trick is in establishing the intent.
Definitely okay with what was going on for a degree, or he was very negligent. He was willing to lie about the risks involved, even though they were very clear. And
well, if you're lying, then it goes beyond negligence, doesn't it? If you're just lying outright about a thing.
Seems to be that the people who were actually doing the killing, I think the quote from Hobiko was something like, he was asked by one of his fighters what to do with captured women and children, and he said, "Don't ask me that again, you know what to do." So that was probably an instance of at least the defense minister quite possibly knowingly aiding and abetting a genocidal act. But beyond that, I don't think how the state of Israel or the war cabinets I don't think they've ever done it like that, no.
But the Nakba not
Aiding and abetting.
count as a genocidal act?
Definitely not, no.
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 The purposeful displacement of tens of thousands and murder as well. That's not genocidal?
No, I think originally Raphael Lemkin tried to argue for putting displacement into the definition of genocide, and it was rejected. So that's not, and you can't, like, for displacement, if that's the goal, you can't get done for genocide for that, no. Even if you kill.
See, this is where I think Lonerbox's weakness lies. This is where Lonerbox's biggest weakness lies. He thinks that just because something is within the law, that it means that basically it is as it should be. Right? The UN Convention has problems. Cutting out the things that Lemkin wanted is one of the problems of the UN Convention of Genocide. Because, for example, the USSR opted for crossing out certain groups from the UN definition of genocide because the USSR was doing those things. So if the groups that Lemkin wanted in the UN Convention stayed, then automatically the USSR would be committing the crime. So in order not to be committing the crime, the USSR demanded that those groups be crossed out. Simple. So it becomes a totally different discussion, you know? Just because the law is constructed the way it is, it doesn't mean that the law is infallible. That it doesn't mean the law is perfect, that it is the way it should be, so to speak. Even when we maneuver around the UN Genocide Convention, we need to acknowledge its limitations and its faults as well when discussing what is and isn't a genocide. Because at this point, we're not really discussing what is and isn't a genocide. We are discussing what will be recognized as genocide by international law without a reasonable doubt. But those are not the same topics. This is not the same question. Whether or not the question of whether or not something is a genocide and the question of whether or not it will be recognized as such by international law are not necessarily synonymous questions when discussing genocide. This is exactly why within academia you have 50 definitions in circulation, because academics recognize the limitations of the UN Convention when it comes to discussing the topic. So basically what we're having here is not a question of whether or not something is a genocide, but whether or not it will be recognized as such by law.
People in order to do
Which, in my opinion, is a separate discussion.
it, because obviously the whole point of genocide is the special intent, the specific intent to reduce in whole or in part that population.
Not reduce, destroy. So already we're having a little bit of a... you're not being specific. You're not being precise with your language. How can you reduce a group in whole? You cannot reduce a group in whole because reduce means lower the number. It's destroy in whole or in part, not reduce. Yeah, so you cannot reduce a group in whole. What will happen if the UN court concluded what would happen if the ICC concluded it was genocide, for example, or the ICJ? Well, then I suppose people responsible would be tried for genocide and punished, at least in theory. Theoretically speaking, on paper, that is what's supposed to happen. People involved, people directly responsible, get tried for the crime of genocide.
So you can have mens rea, you can be willing to murder people, but if it's for a goal of like removal, which some did happen in some cases in the Nakba, we can go into that more detail if you want. But no, I don't think that counts as genocide. I feel like that's why most people don't call it that either.
Well, I don't know about that. After all, the Armenian genocide was a removal of people, which resulted in their death and is classified as a genocide. You would not make a case that it was not genocide because the goal was the removal of people. And you would also not make that same case for the genocide of the Herero and Nama people in southwestern Africa by the German Empire, when they killed the men and drove the women and children into the desert. And the whole thing was, if you survive the trek through the desert, then good for you, and if you don't, then you don't. That is still very pretty decisively treated as genocide. Germany itself accepted it sort of as genocide. Germany itself admitted that it is genocide and sort of started talking even about reparations to the region. Right?
Okay, right. Okay, so let's, I suppose, read the UN definition. It's very brief. In the present convention, genocide means the following acts.
Also, keep in mind, there's a very important part of the convention, and that is not just a convention created to punish. It is also a convention that is created for the prevention of genocide.
with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, such as A, killing members of the group. I don't think we need to argue that point. I think the Palestinians have been killed.
Mhm.
I think we can concede that point. B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And E, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group.
Mhm.
I don't really think you can argue D and E. I think that's not really applicable, but you don't have to meet every single criteria
No, you don't.
to be genocide, for instance.
No, you don't. You don't.
Right?
No, you only need to meet one.
Yeah. Okay. So, what about the killing of the tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza since October the 7th? Doesn't classify as genocide, given the obvious murderous intent of leading Israeli government ministers.
So again, I don't think the murderous intent is as obvious as people make it out to be. Again, we can go into detail on that particular one if you want. Obviously, yeah, I think the killing has obviously happened, but there's a reason that, not every war becomes genocide, because it depends on how those people died and what the intent was behind killing them. I don't think the intent behind those deaths was the specific dolo specialis to take out like the Palestinian population. No.
Well, you don't. It doesn't have to be a matter of murdering all of them. For instance,
in whole or in part. Yeah.
They're in whole. People often forget the or in part.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, for instance, when you have members of the Knesset, I mean, I can go through the quotes, but that would be, I think, probably quite boring. And
No, I think we should. We could. That would be quite.
Oh, if you wanted to. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, the obvious big one was Netanyahu saying you must remember Amalek. What Amalek has done to you, says the Holy Bible, and we do remember, which I think is pretty obviously mass murderous intent. That the biblical story there is not. It's not ambiguous. It's not unclear as to what that means. It's about the destruction of all of the people who are your enemies, right?
Okay, so I guess you understand, like, just like a general language question. You know how there's like literal definitions of words, and then there's the way that the use of a word can dictate its meaning. For example, long before the definition of parent included adoptive parent, we still called adoptive parents parents, even though it didn't meet the definition, right? So like use can affect meaning. So do you think when Jews say Amalek in their parlance, are they generally meaning it in that literal sense, like that biblical sense, do you think?
Well, no, but I'm not talking about Jews. I'm talking about a specific person who happens to be the head of government.
Yeah,
therefore,
I know, but I'm just saying, like, but obviously he's
situation.
speaking. I think he said it, like he's speaking to Jews when he's saying it. So,
Well, he's speaking. I think specifically it was to a press conference on the eve of the invasion. And again, it's not in isolation, because I think you can take these quotes in the round. I think you can see a clear pattern where this isn't just the occasional misunderstanding or mistranslation. This is a clear pattern of leading members of the Israeli government having a genocidal bloodlust, frankly. And I know people
Fortunately not.
are going to say blood libel, but fuck it.
Like, no, I don't care about that. You can say, oh yeah, I'm not going to do any of it.
Yeah, exactly. No, I know you're not, because I, for anyone, don't hate on Lonerbox. It's not like some crazy fucking Zionist. It's just a person who I have disagreements with on this topic. Yeah, so I think there's definitely a genocidal intent. It's not just that he's making some sort of nuanced point about the enemies of us or whatever. I think there's a clear pattern of, like I say, I think it's genocidal rhetoric, along with the sort of dehumanizing rhetoric that you get from a lot of Israeli leaders as well, which you can't just say that that's like hyperbolic language, because you get hyperbolic language in any war situation. You get nationalist rhetoric, you get kind of bombast and all the rest of it. Yeah, this has been a thing that they've talked about for a very long time and have begun to enact, and not just in the Gaza Strip, by the way, but obviously they've been murdering people and continuing settlements in the West Bank as well.
Yeah, so this is why I think it's. I want to focus on particular quotes, because I know it seems like a forest, but I'd like to just look at each individual tree and just see exactly if it fits. Because so to you, referring to a group of people as Amalek is like generally, if it's coming from an official, especially, that counts as like incitement against that entire group, right? Like,
I think so. Yeah, it's
Okay.
not. I don't think you can say it's like some random person down the pub saying a thing slightly out of
Yeah.
context.
So
If
my
you're the head of government, you've
question,
got to be pretty fucking diplomatic about it. I think.
so my question is why is there an Amalek monument on The Hague, in one of the buildings on The Hague?
There probably oughtn't be. Just like I don't think there should be 10 commandments outside of a courthouse in America. Yeah, like
Yeah, but why is it there?
saying there's fuckery elsewhere doesn't excuse fuckery in any individual situation, does it?
Is
Like
it fuckery?
I'm
I
sure.
feel like it's just there as a Holocaust memorial. Like, remember what Amalek did to you? Never forget. It seems like they're referring to. I don't think it's inciting. I don't think it's a genocidal statement against Germans. I don't think anyone's ever complained that it was.
No, it's not. Although you bring up an interesting point with Germany, which we might get into about the way in which its support of Israel being a kind of a bizarre situation. Although that's at the Hague, you said, so that's the Netherlands, I guess. But
Mhm.
yeah, that its support being essentially a matter of guilt over the Holocaust, but getting Palestinians to pay for that guilt. It's a very, very sick situation.
We can go
Anyway,
into
that's
that as well if you, one thing at a time. But yeah, I
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't want to
imagine
get
there's been
too
no
sidetracked.
protest.
Yeah.
I'd imagine there's been no protest against there being an Amalek monument in The Hague on this building, because I think people understand that it's not painting all Germans and saying that there's any cause to go to Germany and kill all the women,
Well,
children,
no, but
cattle,
there's
and asses, because it's like
well,
it's a
no,
word that
but
has
there's
a specific
clearly a
meaning
difference.
in terms of like atrocities were
Yeah.
committed against us, right?
Well, that is a bit of a different statement, though.
Right, but there's a difference between that having in a kind of passive sense, because there's no intent either by the authorities of The Hague or indeed the Dutch government more broadly. There's no military build-up at the Dutch-German border that they
Yeah,
could
but that's the
act
thing is
upon.
like, so when you say Amalek, it's like, I don't know how many people sit there taking that as a command to do the women, children, cattle, and asses thing. It seems to be that
Well, no, they
based on what
probably don't.
So how should we take it then? That's the question, right? How should we take it? Why was it mentioned? Why was it invoked in the press conference to begin with? What was the purpose?
guy who
There's
says
probably
generally is like, it seems like he's mostly talking about Hamas, no?
well, I'm supposed he probably is talking mostly about Hamas, and you can always read a lot of these quotes as being about Hamas. But when you have the defense minister saying that he's removing restraints and restrictions on armed force members, when you have leading Israeli politicians talking about there being no innocent people in Gaza, you put those things together, and it's not very difficult to see the way in which innocent people would be targeted in that kind of rhetorical, dehumanizing condition.
The one who said no innocence in Gaza. Let's have a look at that this point, because this might
Herzog,
probably
Israel Herzog, I think was the one. Hang on, but
was it Herzog? Hang on. This is the
yeah,
one where he said
Israel.
there are no innocents in Gaza. The killers. This is a Knesset member. Where's the one from Herzog? It was a similar one. It's not
The
true
quote
what
I
they
have
say,
from Herzog.
civilians.
Well, there's two from Herzog. There are no innocent civilians in Gaza, and it's an entire nation out there that is responsible. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved,
Okay.
it's absolutely not true.
This is okay. So this is why I think South Africa are being intentionally dishonest. Because if you look at this quote, with the way that this quote has been used, I'll send it to you on Discord if you want to see it.
By the way, I'm not judging this on the basis of what South Africa have done at the ICJ because I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not even
Yeah, I
pretend
know.
that
It's
I
still,
understand it completely.
yeah, I know. It's even relevant without. So if you look at this article, the way that they've said it, it's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved. It's absolutely not true. And we will then ellipses, long ellipses, and we will fight until we break their backbone. The way this is interpreted, obviously, is saying he made it clear that Israel was not distinguishing between militants and civilians. So, I mean, it sounds pretty clear the way they've phrased it. But then if you even follow their own hyperlink, it's like there's the article where it came from. He does say that about we are operating militarily in terms according to rules of international law, period, unequivocally. Then it's not it's an entire nation out there that's responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved is absolutely not true. They could have risen up. They could have fought against the evil regime, coup d'etat, etc. We're at war. We're defending our homes. We're protecting our homes. So it sounds all very not distinguishing. But then there's like just down the paragraph, he continues, I agree. There are many innocent Palestinians who don't agree with this. But if you have a missile in your goddamn kitchen and you want to shoot it at me, am I allowed to defend myself?
So basically, it doesn't make it any better. This quote doesn't make it any better. Because It just says there are surely many innocent Palestinians who don't agree with this. But even if you're quote unquote innocent and don't agree and don't do anything about it, then you're fair game because you have a missile in your goddamn kitchen. So I'm allowed to defend myself by killing you. That is basically what is being said here. You may be innocent, but at the end of the day, you're culpable. You're co-responsible with your passiveness, with not actively resisting, by not condemning Hamas. That is basically what this quote says. So the full context, in my opinion, does not make it much better, unless my reading comprehension is lacking in this instance.
We have to defend ourselves. We have the right to do so.
Yeah, by killing you, even though you might be innocent in theory, but in practice, not really. Hello, Taj. Join the page. Like it's...
And then he's even asked, he acknowledged that many Gazans have nothing to do with Hamas, but was adamant that others.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean anything if it follows with the statement that even though you may be innocent, you have a rocket targeted at me in your kitchen, which means that I can defend myself against you, even if you're innocent. It's like, it's not exactly making the statement any better, in my personal opinion. And I'm not an expert on this conflict by any stretch of the imagination. I have a lot of knowledge lacking. I have a lot of reading to do about this conflict and the history of this conflict, for that matter. There are certainly things that I'm much more knowledgeable about than this conflict. But on the other hand, I can also plainly see what's being written here. So, unless I'm mistaken and just cannot, unless my reading comprehension is just abysmally bad, just, you know.
Dead. So it seems to be that the context of him saying this is he's talking about certain civilians who are not Hamas.
And I don't think, as much as I like to insult myself, I don't think that my reading comprehension is quite that bad.
But are still armed and are firing rockets, and I guess that's also in reference to October 7th because a bunch of
Right, but also
people who went in were civilians. So
yeah,
the quote is
but
completely
again,
ripped
I
out of
don't think
context.
that. Well, I don't think that context really adds a great deal to it. Unfortunately, you can't, on the one hand,
I agree. I agree with Kevin Logan here. I find myself in agreement with Kevin Logan here. It's just, it doesn't really change much, this added context. Not in a way that a Lonerbox would want anyway.
Statements like there are no innocent civilians, and then go on to say, "Oh, but there are innocent civilians," on the basis that you're literally saying that these people, because they didn't rise up, are somehow complicit or at fault for this. You're saying because they didn't revolt against an armed force that was fucking ruling over them for the last 15 years, especially when most of them are fucking children anyway, that they're somehow complicit in this and therefore are liable for the consequences of the actions of Hamas. Again, when you then put it in the context of the fact that people between the ages, I think, is it 16 and 45, I forget, who are
are you a Lonerbox viewer? Touch for you. Are you a Lonerbox viewer? He's been slightly pissing me off with these takes lately. Have you found this stream through Lonerbox? Have you found me through my first debate with Lonerbox? That would be pretty interesting. Because as you may or may not know, I've already had a debate with Lonerbox about genocide, about the topic, through Sunday. Lol, no, through Sunday. Listen, you should stop being white. That's my advice to you. Of course, only if you have the means. If you don't have the means, then don't stop being white. But it would help me a great deal if you would. especially since my situation has been, I mean in the chat. When I say stop being white, I mean in the chat. But then again, that should be an extra incentive for you not to be white. Okay. This is the part when I beg my viewers for money, because this is basically my main way of making money, because I make this streaming thing my living thing. Just for that, I will no longer be white. Thank you. Thank you very much in advance.
Essentially an invisible lined kill area, regardless of whether they're a terrorist or not, are counted as.
There you go. Kevin Logan just said what I said in a far more British and sophisticated way. I said it in a simplistic, to the point Slavic way, and Kevin Logan said it in a posh British way.
Terrorist. So essentially you're saying we're going to kill X number of fucking civilians here, probably, but we don't give a fuck.
Well, no, I mean,
So
it sounds like you added that part in. It sounds like
if
you
you
added that
happen
part
to
in
be-
where you said,
No, no.
therefore, you
Well, it's not as much as we don't give a fuck, quote unquote. It's more like it's unnecessary evil, since you're firing rockets at us and we have the right to defend ourselves by killing you. That's the insidious part, in my opinion. It's not like we don't, it's not even saying we don't care. We do care about you being innocent, but unfortunately your innocent doesn't mean much when your kitchen is being used to fire at us. That is basically what is being said. Like, that's the insidious part. It is not saying we don't care. It actually is trying to say we do care about your innocence, but your innocence at the, on the, you know, in the grand scheme of things does not mean much, because you are still being used to attack us and we have the right to defend ourselves. Right?
get the act, because when he's talking about the military action, he seems everything he said about military action is he's
So it's sort of, in my opinion, goes in a different route than just saying we don't care, which in my opinion makes it a bit more insidious.
claiming to be wanting to follow international law and acknowledging
Which
that
we
there are
know
such
isn't-
thing as
which-
innocent
well,
Palestinians.
Yeah, we want to follow international law, and we will follow international law, and it is within our right.
Oh, Barry!
Thank you for the tier 1 subscription, revoking my whiteness. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. It will help me to, well, it'll help me to fulfill my big ambitious goals, and I do have big ambitious goals, like survival or buying food, etc. But yeah, it is basic thing that's the whole point of this. It is within our rights, it is within our international quote unquote right to defend ourselves. And our right to defend ourselves means that sometimes, even though there are innocent civilians, we still have to do it, because those innocent civilians' kitchens are used to strike rockets at us. You see? That's why it's not about we don't care. It's about we have no choice and everything is above board. Right? We have no choice. That's the framing. We just have no choice. We have to defend ourselves. That is the choice. The choice. That is the framing. Sort of.
Well, we know that isn't true, though. We know they're not following international law. So him paying lip service to it is fucking irrelevant to the topic, as far as I'm concerned. That's like saying a murderer claims to be innocent, so you let him go. No, obviously not, right? We can see they're committing fucking war crime. Literally, they did it straight away by cutting off water and electricity. The collective punishment. It's a fucking war crime. We know that they're doing that. So
that is true. Collective punishment is certainly a thing being done in Gaza. That you cannot you cannot deny that. You cannot deny that there is collective punishment going on by the Israeli government towards Gaza. I certainly hope Lonerbox is not going to argue that collective punishment is happening. But there is a catch here. There is a catch here that Lonerbox may as well utilize here. He might as well say, yeah, there is collective punishment. Yeah, there are war crimes happening. And then he can go on to say, I agree. I agree that Israel should be punished for and tried for war crimes. But it does not automatically follow that those war crimes are genocide. He could say that. He could very well say that. Because not every war crime is genocide. So he might as well go that route of, yeah, Israel is committing those things, but I just don't think it's genocide, basically. That's a route that is available to... We'll see if that's going to be the road that Lonerbox goes for.
His protestations to the country are irrelevant.
Well,
My point is, when you take in the round, because Isaac Herzog, for instance, is not the head
Just
of the...
keep in mind, the question here is not whether or not Israel is committing war crimes. It is whether or not Israel is committing a genocide. Which again, those are separate questions. Those are not synonymous questions. If you establish that Israel is committing war crimes, you've not yet established automatically that it is committing a genocide. It's,
idea, right? I'm saying there is a broader attitude within the upper echelons of Israeli government and military life that are genocidal, right?
So, see, I'm taking this, I guess, neutral role of just doing an analysis of what is being said. I'm being less judgmental than you might have expected of me.
Isaac Herzog will say things like there are no innocent civilians in Gaza. The Israeli Defense Force act as if there are no innocent Palestinians in Gaza. They will literally kill anyone between the ages of 16 and 45 in this kill zone, which the Palestinians don't even fucking know is there. It's just an area on a map that's been decided by Israel, and they get counted as Hamas, even though they just happen to fucking live there and be there, which they're perfectly entitled to be there because that's where...
Which, by the way, takes... You could argue that this takes the point in the UN Convention about creating conditions for the group that makes it difficult or impossible to live. I think that is a thing that Kevin Logan might start arguing, that Israel is actually, and also the cutting off of water and electricity, that all this combined is creating conditions of, that it's creating those impossible conditions for the Palestinians. That is a thing that Kevin Logan could argue. That it takes this particular point in the UN Convention.
where they fucking live.
Okay,
So
you're making a lot of statements at once. I'm just trying to focus on like one thing.
They don't seem to be distinguishing between civilians and combatants, which is a war crime.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, I'm not sure if Kevin Logan is... Yes, it is a war crime. But again, not every war crime is genocide. So it is not enough to establish war crimes happening. Because again, Lonerbox could just say, yeah, I agree. War crimes are happening and Israel should be facing consequences for enacting those war crimes. But we have not established yet that those war crimes are specifically genocide. Right? That is what Lonerbox could, once again, I will repeat, argue.
So cutting off water, electricity. So I don't think cutting off electricity is a violation of IHL. I've never seen that. The water, yes, there were 3 pipes. I think.
I mean, it creates conditions that make it difficult or impossible to live for the Palestinians, which again ticks one of the points in the UN Convention of Prevention and Punishment of Genocide. So the question is, do you acknowledge, based on these conditions, that is, I guess, a question to Lonerbox that I would posit, do you accept that the combination of cutting off water, cutting off electricity, I'm pretty sure limiting access of food, etc., and bombing campaigns, if you take all these things, put them together, could you not come to the conclusion that Israel is deliberately creating conditions that make it impossible for Palestinians to live in Gaza, which would definitely tick one of the conditions for genocide in the convention, if true?
They made up 9% of Gaza's water that was being sold by Israel. There is legal contention over because it was actually being sold, but again, I don't buy it. I think it was. That's one thing I think is a clear violation. I think 2 of the pipes came back on within a couple of weeks. One of them took about 6 months before they turned it back on. So that one, yeah, I think is a complete violation of IHL, the water, not the electricity. But you said quite a few things there. But this thing about Isaac...
Well, the electricity as well, no? You could argue. Because without electricity, hospitals cannot function. And without hospitals functioning, logically speaking, by extension, life support systems cannot function. And people just die. So, I guess, again, I would posit a question to Lonerbox. Should that be considered a crime? Should that be considered as acceptable? Depriving hospitals of electricity? And does that contribute to the whole point within the convention about making it impossible for a population to live? Right? I would argue for electricity as well for these reasons. For example, I would point to hospitals as obvious examples of things that absolutely need electricity to function and keep people alive within them. No? Is that not a sufficient argument?
Herzog is like, it's not him, like that quote is not him saying that like everyone is fair game. It like within that whole statement, he literally acknowledges that there is such a thing as Palestinian civilians who are not fair game.
And how are you enjoying this stream so far and my little bit of exploratory / questiony nature of me analyzing this debate? I've decided to take the route of just sort of asking questions about what is being said. I decided to sort of just, not judge one way or the other, but to sort of poke and see, who knows, maybe these topics will come up when I debate with Lonerbox.
But even if I grant you that the rhetoric is very inflammatory and irresponsible, I agree that a lot of it is. Obviously, I don't think that necessarily signals that they're definitely intending to commit genocide or enact it into a policy or anything like that. Because if that were the case, like if we look at inflammatory war rhetoric, I mean...
Interestingly enough, unexpectedly, Lonerbox did not even address the whole war crime thing. He just sidestepped it completely. He just ignored the question of war crimes and focused on the intent, on the genocide part, I guess, on the intent, on whether or not there is intent. Policy. That is a very tricky thing, by the way, the policy thing. Because nobody who has two brain cells to rub together, especially after World War II, will just blatantly put genocide in their policy. Okay, nobody will just be, okay, our policy is to genocide these people. Like, they will, of course, any government that has at least some sense, some intelligence to speak of, will put it in some roundabout, convoluted sort of schema of laws that will not sort of blatantly say our policy is to genocide these people, right? But the result of the policy will be basically de facto genociding those people, even if it will not be blatantly stated, right? Because who would do that after World War II? Thank you, Estelle. And also with Hitler and the Nazis, you could sort of make a case that the Nazi Party has had an internal policy of genocide, right? It wasn't public, but there was certainly an internal one. You could make a case for that. Definitely. It will not be obvious. I'll just say that.
Do you think they were actually orchestrating it? Do you think they were like the armies were going in there with a genocidal plan?
Well, I mean, if you talk about was there a policy, maybe, but individual soldiers fight for many different reasons, don't they?
Well, it's not individual soldiers. It was like the Arab Legion and the like whoever Al Husseini was commanding the ALA. Like these were armies. Yeah. They had commands, and there were massacres committed against Jewish civilians. Well, quite a lot of them. But the question is,
they did intend to. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But again, let's grant completely that the Arabs were trying to destroy all Jewish people in 1948. Whatever.
Well, I don't think they were. That's the problem.
No, I'm not saying they were, but I'm saying that you bringing up someone else doing a genocide doesn't detract or alleviate in any way this current genocide.
That's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is I'm saying that.
Well, it seems like kind of obfuscation as well.
No. That's not what I'm doing. One second. I'm saying that this is an example of people. Arab leaders who had much more, I would say, genocidal rhetoric than the Israeli leaders do now. But as far as the evidence that the armies were actually trying to commit genocide, or that there were any orders to, or any policy that was in that direction, despite massacres,
again, like very rarely will you have explicit policy of we will genocide these people, because that would be the stupidest thing that a government or a ruling body could do. Like, there might be policy that in the end leads to genocide, but it's not going to be directly stating that its goal is to genocide a people. Right? He's doing pretty okay. I think Kevin Logan is doing a fairly well job. So far so good. I think we're sort of getting some questions out there. Sinister. Because he's thinking deeply about a subject. That's why. He's thinking deeply about the subject. And he's being accused of obfuscation, so he's going to be annoyed. He has an annoyed face because he's under an impression that Kevin Logan is misunderstanding his point, and he's going to try to rephrase it. Just for context. He thinks so hard, but he comes to the wrong conclusion. Well, you know. Unfortunately, that happens to the best of us.
Like they were. It didn't seem like genocide was the goal of any of these Arab militias or forces.
So yes, once again, I will say it for the last time, unless this comes up again. No rational, logical country will ever explicitly put in its policy, especially public policy, we wish to genocide these people. Because all countries, even when they commit genocide, on paper want to keep themselves squeaky clean so that they can say, oh no, we're not actually committing genocide. We're actually doing this totally other thing. Like, I'll give you an example. The Sri Lanka the Sri Lanka genocide, I believe, of the Tamil people. Like, it's obviously a genocide, but the government of Sri Lanka will still say, oh no, we're totally not doing genocide. We're totally doing this other completely different thing, No government, especially after World War II, will be stupid enough to just put in their policy, oh, our plan is to basically eradicate these people. Like, no government will do that. Like, you can look for it, but it's like a fool's errand, basically. So I'm not sure if this argument is sound to begin with. To say since it's not in policy, then it can't be a genocide. I found it to be a pretty weak line of argumentation, let's just say.
Even though the rhetoric of their leaders was was far more inflammatory than what Israelis are saying. So my argument is that the rhetoric alone, like the rhetoric doesn't indicate clear intent. Rhetoric indicates people saying mad shit during war like they always do.
Well, I think there has to be a distinction here. Like, what sort of mad shit do people usually say in war? And what distinguishes mad shit said during war from genocidal rhetoric? If a leader of a country during war says we will eradicate all of our enemies, we will eradicate every single civilian from enemy cities, is that genocidal rhetoric, or is this just mad shit said during war? When Russia says that Ukraine is not a nation, that Ukraine as a nation should be eradicated, that being Ukrainian is a disease of the mind, is that genocidal rhetoric, or is that just mad shit, quote unquote, said during war? Because I think it's a very vague statement saying that it's just vague shit, it's just mad shit said during, you know what I mean? So even here you'd have to get into a little bit more detail, I believe.
So we can look at particular policies on the ground and the way the war is being conducted, but I think
you can look at policies, but you cannot look at them and search for explicit call for genocide, because you will not find it. You will never find it. You have to look at policies and look at what the effect of those policies will be. Will the effect of those policies be the de facto destruction of a group in part or in whole? And you cannot just look at single policies in isolation. You have to look at policies, and you have to look at how they interact with other policies, etc. How it all connects together, and what is the result of this sort of interplay of different policies on the targeted group, right? If the result is the de facto destruction of that group in whole or in part, then we have genocidal policy, basically, right? But what you're not supposed to do is look for policies that explicitly say, well, now the goal is to destroy these people. That's never going to happen. Yeah, of course, governments will not want to use the word. It does invoke stopping it, because I will remind, the genocide, the UN Convention is a convention of prevention and punishment. Prevention is an important part of it, even though people often just overlook it and ignore it. Like, prevention is actually the bigger goal of the two in the convention. Like, we want to prevent more than we want to punish, because when we punish, it means that there's been a failure of prevention, right? Obviously, it means that the thing happened and it needs to be punished. And what we really want to do to prevent the thing from happening in the first place. That would be the ideal goal. And that is, technically speaking, the goal of the UN Convention as well.
Thing that you said earlier is that they're not distinguishing between Hamas
Well,
and
that's
civilians.
well,
I think they quite clearly are. I think it seems to be that they are targeting Hamas. I think the war
well,
plays out in that way.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get into that in a second. But this is why I said let's not get bogged down too much in the quotes, right? Because I don't want this to just be me say a quote and then you say, whatever. Like that seems like a boring way of going about it. I think we can both, whether you want to call it inflammatory, I will call it genocidal. But regardless, the point is they're definitely talking about killing lots of fucking people, and it's a matter of does that play into the way in which the war, turns out. So we can go through them if you like, or we can move on to the practical on the ground stuff. It's it's up to you, really.
I'm just saying what matters is I know it seems like bogging down, but it's because I feel you're bringing in a bunch of talking points here that I think are always misunderstood, because I almost guarantee most people who make that claim about Herzog don't know that there are paragraphs in that same article where he's talking about distinguishing between civilians. And it's the same thing with a bunch.
Sure, but the context here does not make it better. As I said, I've explained why, in my opinion, this context does not make the situation any better. I mean, you might disagree with me, but that is my interpretation of the text. That is my interpretation of what was being said. And then if you disagree, you would have to sort of argument to me why that is the case, why I am mistaken in my interpretation.
Bunch of them. There's a bunch of these quotes
Okay,
that if you look at paragraphs
add...
surrounding it, they specify Hamas. I'm just saying, it matters
no,
when
but
people use these quotes out of context. Yeah.
That context you gave doesn't alleviate what he fucking said. The fact that he then backtracked or some shit and claimed that he was following that Israel was following international law doesn't change what he actually fucking said.
No, it's not like a backtrack, though.
The way in which well, clearly from him it is a backtrack.
No, it matters.
I actually don't even agree with what Kevin Logan says. I just think, again, in that particular quote, what was being said, there are civilians that are innocent, but their innocence does not matter de facto, since their kitchens are being used to fire rockets at us, and in order to defend them ourselves, which we have the right to do, we have to kill them even though they're innocent, because we have to destroy their rockets in their kitchens. So it was, in my opinion, it was the rhetoric of, we don't want to kill innocent civilians, but actually we don't really have a choice. We have to do it in order to defend ourselves. That is the rhetoric. We don't have a choice, really. We have to do it.
Just because the statement
it
about...
might be a matter of the... Go on.
It matters because the statement about saying there are no innocents or there are no civilians in Gaza, they're all part of this, they could have gotten rid of Hamas. You could say that, but then that might not necessarily be a statement about your military goal. It can be a statement, a political statement, because most people in Gaza do seem to have at least some support for Hamas, and we saw people celebrating when Hamas dragged people's dead bodies in. So you can make a political statement about how the civilian population is in favor of it, but that is still... You can say that and also acknowledge that they're not military targets. You can easily say that, right?
If Israel's goal was to lessen support for Hamas in Gaza Strip, it would have been spectacularly counterproductive in that, because they were very unpopular before this, and now it looks like they're polling around 60% if there are an election there. Not that there can be an election there, because they've destroyed most of the fucking buildings.
I don't think they care about...
Difficult.
Yeah, I don't think they care about getting rid of support for Hamas. I think they care about getting rid of the military apparatus and their ability to launch rockets and wars, basically. Yeah, I don't think they care about... Yeah, they're not trying to make Hamas less popular. They're not trying to win hearts and minds, obviously.
Destroying all of the buildings, put it all together, and you sort of take the creating conditions that make it impossible for people to live. You take that box, and I'm surprised that this has not become a point of discussion yet. I'm not sure if it will, but there is a case to be made there. When you combine taking away electricity, water, and I believe food, and then destroy buildings, deprive people of places to live, literally, force them to go south and then who knows where, then you create conditions that make it impossible for people to live. And that is one of the points within the UN Genocide Convention. And that is a thing that could be discussed. That is a thing that could be sort of analyzed. That is a thing that you could get into and sort of dive into, right? But I'm not sure if it's gonna happen in this debate.
Fail. I think they've rather failed in that regard as well.
Okay.
6 months down the line, and a nuclear armed power is still scratching around in the rubble. The tunnels seem to be there. They seem to be able to operate. They're still there. Look, I mean, they fucking failed in this regard. And at the
And of course, there's the whole part of humanitarian aid groups being bombed as well and killed.
expense of tens of thousands of Palestinian lives, which is rather unfortunate.
I mean, they're down to 4 battalions out of 24. So, but yeah, I guess Rafa's the last 4. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So on the ground.
Yeah.
And this is where the this kind of hyped up rhetoric, I think, does play into this, because when you have the defense minister saying that he's going to get rid of restraints, he said he would get rid of all restraints. This was an all-out war. Now you can say that's just bluster and rhetoric. I would argue it's very fucking dangerous, even if that is the case. But ultimately, when you then have the kind of democide that we see in Gaza, where I think
again, one has to be careful here, because in many of these cases, Lonerbox could easily just say, yeah, I agree, it is dangerous. I agree, it can lead to war crimes. I agree that those war crimes should be looked at and possibly consequences should be sort of brought down on Israel for committing war crimes. But it does not automatically stand to reason that a war crime has to be genocide. That could be, again, his line.
The latest, it's nearly 3/4 of housing has been largely destroyed, I think is the phrase that was used. So basically uninhabitable. That basically makes, again, this is going back to the definition of genocide, right? Making conditions of life calculated to bring
there you go. This is like, I've been saying it for a while now. Now they will get into it now. And I'm wondering what will Lonerbox say, because you could argue that one thing is not necessarily it, but if you take them all together, water, electricity, food, destruction of the houses, bombing, forcing people to relocate in a very short amount of time, that builds a picture, no? That suddenly becomes something.
About its physical destruction in whole or in part. If you can't fucking live in a place, then having any kind of cohesive community or ethnic, group in a region is basically impossible. And Israel has, just like I say, destroyed nearly 3/4 of housing in the region, which again can't possibly be down to them strategically targeting Hamas, because Hamas were in fucking 75% of the houses. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, 75% of the houses have been destroyed, or what? 75.
Have been largely destroyed. I saw the number that 75% of the housing in the Gaza Strip had been destroyed.
Let me have a look.
Rendered uninhabitable, I think, was the exact definition. But
yeah,
yes.
I mean, I've seen the 70% claim. It's just that it clashes with even the UN's own data from April, like from this month. I think they've said, so they have a list here of identifying destroyed structures.
50% is still a lot. It still contributes to the picture that is being painted, creating difficult or impossible conditions for people, right? It doesn't take away from the point, even if it's 50%. So it does not take away from the point.
severely damaged, moderately damaged, or possibly damaged, and then you're up to like 50% of the total structures, and this is in April. But then if you take out the possibly damaged, then you're like anything between like 30, it takes off like 12%. So you're like between 38 and 50. The 70% thing was a total, it was based on a bad algorithm that
That may be true, but it doesn't change the point being made.
just looked at very pixelated aerial photographs or aerial whatever, like aerial imagery, and then just built a bunch of estimates around like bad data. But yeah, it seems to be that number is down.
Okay,
and this
let's
is like now.
let's
So
okay. Let's say it's a third then. Let's say it's a third. Whatever. Is that in any way a tolerable destruction rate? In what other war would you have that as a strategic strike against just the terrorists involved there?
what are
But
we? What war
that
are we
involves
comparing it to?
basically carpet bombing. That's like the kind of damage you would get in.
I mean, the
cities like
firebombing of Dresden was was about a third or 40% of all the buildings, but that took 2 days.
Exactly.
That took 2 days, not 6 months.
It's irrelevant. That's irrelevant. I don't think that's relevant to the point whether or not it's 2 days or 3 or months. The result is what matters, and the result is creating a. The result is creating this impossible environment for people to live in, because it's not just the destruction of buildings. Again, we're not just looking at one thing. We're looking at a bunch of things that sort of come together to create a picture. We're looking at the destruction of buildings plus the deprivation of electricity, water, and food, and forcing people to move in a very short order. We're looking at all of these things at once. We're not just looking at one thing in isolation. So then we can ask the question, does that tick the genocide convention point about creating an environment that makes it impossible for people to live? Only when we look at all these things at once, not just when we isolate things individually and judge them individually, because that is not how we're supposed to do these things. Right? Does that make sense? You have to look at things more holistically when it comes to these things, in my opinion. I'm gonna preface all of this with, in my opinion.
Right, but most of the destruction was done in the opening 2 months, I believe. And also, you've got to bear in mind the fact that that was done in 2 days because of the 1,000 bomber raids, but they'd done this to dozens of German cities before this. So, I mean, if we're going to go by, oh god, it's difficult to compare because Germany's a much larger country, both population and geographic-wise. But I would argue that it's, you could, oh Jesus, how would you even do the mathematics on that? I'm not sure. But basically, it doesn't matter if it doesn't matter so much anyway if it takes 2 days because you've got more planes, or 6 months or 2 months or whatever because you've got fewer. Like, that's still, you're not doing strategic strike. Well, we've seen with the way in which the Americans have targeted specific Houthi sites, and I know it's not exactly one for one, but I think you can see the very, very distinct difference between the way in which a strategic strike against a target works and the kind of rather more indiscriminate bombing of civilian areas. And again, the counting of even non-combatant civilians as combatants. Which again goes to the heart of the fact that they're not discriminating really between civilians and military targets, at least in specific areas.
Well, no, so first of all, I don't think you could just say that, well, they took 6 months to do the same damage as Dresden, and therefore it's like the same kind of like the same principle of distinction. I don't think that really works because it's still urban warfare. Like, the fighting is still going on. There are still rockets being fired from some of these areas, and there are still troops running around, and there are still tunnels that are still there, like you said. So the war is still continuing. So that does seem, and people obviously move between structures as well. So I don't think it's surprising that between like 30 and 40% of the buildings would get destroyed, especially given that
it's not exactly true.
Hamas actually have spent most of that time in Gaza, even before they had power, consolidating control over a particular building. I think even before they came to power,
Oh,
they
but it's
controlled
not-
like 40% of the mosques.
But-
So, and that's just
But
like
come
mosques.
on, my dude, come on. Like they've destroyed buildings they knew had no fucking Hamas in them and had no tunnels underneath them. They blew up the fucking Parliament building. They blew up all of the fucking universities. They've blown up all of the hospitals. Like, are you arguing?
Wait,
that
what do you mean they've
Hamas
blown
is
up
in
all of the
control
hospitals? They've blown up all of the hospitals?
Well, most of them have been bombed to the point of basically being unusable for the most part.
Bombed to the point of inoperable, or like there's been damage done from bombings outside of the hospital, or like the area is inoperable because of like lacks of supplies, or what?
You can nitpick if you like, but either way, most Gazans have no real access to a fucking hospital.
Well, it's not nitpicking to go between bombing a hospital versus, or like between
Well, they have
between that and a
bombed
hospital being
hospitals.
between like
Are there any
that and a
major,
hospital
okay.
being inoperable.
Are there
because
any major hospitals in Gaza that haven't been bombed by Israel?
I don't know what you mean by bombed, as in like they've been damaged because bombs have gone off near them, or like they've
Again,
actually.
whether or not hospitals have been bombed directly or not, we're still getting this picture of creating an environment that makes it impossible for people to live in. Destroyed infrastructure, 50%. No electricity. No water. No food. Forcing people to relocate abruptly to the south and then who knows where. Like, again, we cannot really look at these things in isolation. We have to look at all of them combined and see what sort of a thing we get. And then we can ask ourselves, does this count? Does this fit the genocide convention thing? Because those things don't just happen in isolation. They accumulate, like it or not.
Targeted, like
dropped on them.
So what? They've airstruck a hospital. Are they like they flattened hospitals? Which hospitals have been flattened? Like, or
I didn't say flattened. I said bombed.
Well, if you bomb a hospital, like.
Yeah, so I mean, okay, I mean, look, if you want to dance on the head of a pin about the bombing of hospitals, go for it, I guess.
I mean, it matters. That's why the Al Ali story was so big, because if it turned out that Israel had actually just airstruck a hospital and blown it up, that would have been like unprecedented, because like them actually just.
Well, I'm focusing on Gaza for now.
Targeting that like building whilst there are a bunch of patients in there and people taking shelter, that kind of matters compared to that there's damage on that like a complex area, there's fighting there, because we know that.
Because it doesn't change the fact that the environment created by all of these things make it impossible for people to live. So again, we go back to the question if that fits the bill with the UN genocide convention or not. You see? And then again, the question becomes, was it impossible for Israel to predict that if they landed a bomb near a hospital instead of directly at a hospital, that it would damage it? Was it impossible for Israel to predict? I guess that would also be a question that could be asked to Lonerbox. Was it completely impossible for Israel to predict that the hospitals would get damaged to the point of being unusable, even if they were not directly targeted by the bombs?
Hamas
because it did happen. So was that an outcome that was completely impossible to predict and prevent? Is that the argument that is being levied here? That it was just out of Israel's hands?
That's been known for decades. Like, so.
Okay, so would your position be then that the bombing of, let's say, each of the hospitals that have been bombed, to be more apposite than correct in the language, has been justified?
I don't know what's happened in each of the hospitals. It depends. Like if it was like a drone strike on a Hamas operative in the like area, then yeah, sure. But if they're doing it to say like we think these 50 patients are worth 2 guys with RPGs, then probably not. No, that would be insane.
Okay. I would argue that the destruction of both the housing and the universities and a great many of the hospitals, although you wish to quibble apparently about some of that. I would argue that this again is part of a concerted campaign to make life basically unlivable in large swathes, certainly of the north.
Well, you have to also add the other things to that. Again, the electricity, the water, the food, the forcing people to relocate in a very short order. And then you can start a discussion on whether or not, etc. I've said it a bunch of times now. I don't think I have to repeat myself.
Of Gaza, and you then add that, and again, this is all the context that I think matters. And it's not a matter of gish galloping. I'm trying to build a broader picture because there's context here. Nothing happens in isolation. When you add in the settlement drive that a lot of ultra-Zionists in Israel are trying to have, we had the Nahala conference in January, which was attended by two leading members of the Israeli government, which was literally, I called it SettlerCon when I covered it, which basically they wanted to rebuild settlements in northern Gaza. Now, considering Israel has deliberately flattened huge swathes of northern Gaza, and I think leading members of the Israeli government turning up to that conference, it's not that difficult to put two and two together and think that certainly a large number of Zionists would like for that to happen, that colonialist expansion into the territory that has been essentially prepared for recolonization. It's not that out of the question, is it?
I don't think it's out of the question. I think if it happens, it'll be settlers going in of their own volition, and then the government just won't stop them. I don't think the government's ever going to have a. I don't think the government's ever going to put in place a policy to put settlers back into Gaza.
Well, no, hang on. How is that any better? How is that any better? If they're doing things that they know are illegal under international law and immoral beyond belief regardless, and they do nothing about it, then they are tacitly approving of that.
I didn't say it was any better. I'm just saying that's likely how it would happen. And when we're talking about claims of genocide, it actually does matter because...
Again, this is where Lonerbox can swoop in and say, I can agree that war crimes are happening. I can agree that illegal activity is happening. I can agree that there should be consequences for Israel. But it does not automatically follow that the war crime is genocide. That is a stance that Lonerbox could take, and then it would be for Kevin Logan to demonstrate that the war crime is genocide. Because I assume that Lonerbox is not actually denying that any sort of war crimes are happening when it comes to the Israeli conduct in Gaza, right? I assume that that's not what's happening on Lonerbox's side, that he's not outright denying any sort of war crimes happening. I assume that his stance is, yes, there are war crimes happening, but that he will not classify those war crimes as genocide per se. I would hope that's his stance, no? At least.
I don't think just allowing your civilians to go and do something and not really doing that much to stop them is the same as having a genocidal intent from the government.
Hang on. Whoa. Okay, so let's say, for instance, the civilian-led attacks, and they largely were civilian-led, attacks on Jewish people during the Night of the Broken Glass.
Mm-hmm.
The German government just looked the other way and allowed public anger to take place. Was that not one of the opening firing shots of the genocide known as the Holocaust?
This is interesting because I had this debate with Lonerbox before about this very topic. When did the Holocaust begin? And Lonerbox's stance is that it began in, I believe, 1942 or 3 even. So if he still believes that, then he will say, no, it was just a pogrom, not the firing shots of the Holocaust. So, yes. Unless he's changed his mind on this topic and he will say that they were bad.
The government didn't turn a blind eye. They incited it. Goebbels incited Kristallnacht.
And my point is that over the course of decades, Israel and its government have primed the Israeli people.
Oh, he did not answer. Okay. He did not answer the question of whether or not they were the opening shots for the Holocaust. So in other words, I don't know if he's changed his mind on when the Holocaust proper has started.
And we see that now in the fact that huge proportions of the Israeli population don't think that the IDF have gone far enough in Gaza. We see it from the fact that you have these fucking weird drum circles that have appeared at the border to stop aid trucks getting through. The Israeli population have been primed by decades of Zionist propaganda to do this genocide. This isn't, again, genocide doesn't just happen. It's a long ass process. Yes. I'm suggesting
that is true. Usually, societies are being primed to go along with the process of genocide, which is what happened with the German population. It was primed to sort of become more and more okay with Jewish people being treated as lesser and lesser. Yeah, it was a gradual process.
And again, the Zionists will accuse me of being an anti-Semite, and you know what? Go fuck yourself, lads. The same way in which the Nazis primed the German people to act in that way, the Israeli people...
Oh, interesting how the same example that I just used was used right now.
The Israeli government have primed the Israeli people to act towards the Palestinians.
I feel like we need to probably go into a bit more detail about just like one of these claims, because I feel like I'm hearing like 10 of them, and
yeah, and I'm trying not to like do the gish gallop.
Yeah, it's okay. Do you think? Well, I've got all day, so yeah. Do you think Israel is trying to?
I don't have all day. Unfortunately I don't have all day.
Stopping aid trucks.
And in fact, it's midnight, so the day is already over.
Do you think that's like a government thing, or what's can you tell me what's happening with the aid trucks?
Well, I mean, the example I gave was of Israeli civilians, and again, they do appear to be acting independently. They're not being necessarily paid or transported or housed by the government. Have appeared at the border crossing with Egypt to stop the passage of trucks. They're basically creating a human barrier to trucks getting in there. But in terms of
So again, I think it's a mistake to focus on these things individually. You have to say, this is happening, and this is happening, and this is happening, and this is happening. And when you combine all of these factors, now you get an environment in which it is pretty difficult to exist, which is one of the points on the UN Genocide Convention. And the question is, does this fit or not? And now you can discuss.
The government of Israel is undoubtedly the case. Alice Kearns, the British MP, a memo from her was leaked, which suggested that she had seen a letter from David Cameron, the current British Foreign Secretary, who had claimed that the Israeli government, the Elon Levy, the Israeli government spokesperson in Britain, had claimed that the Israeli government had never stopped any aid convoys from getting in. The British Foreign Secretary flatly denied that in a leaked memo. He didn't mean that to become public, but it has become public. The Israeli government have flatly, have consciously stopped aid convoys that the British government wished to send into Gaza from getting there.
Yeah, I know. Like I think it's like 1.5% of trucks have been turned back on average. I don't know if there's any indication that. So first, the protesters, yeah, you're right. They're not government mandated at all. They're actually, well, the IDF has put military zones around those areas, and they've literally fought people off of those areas, like with people on horses and people throwing people off walls and shit to get them away from that. I don't think there's been any evidence that any particular amount of aid has been stopped by.
Why is Lonerbox the go-to guy about this stuff in the wider Destiny? About this stuff in the wider Destiny sphere? Is it just because he reads a lot about it and there are a few videos? What do you mean by this stuff? By this stuff, do you mean the Israel-Palestine conflict? Or do you mean genocide in general? Or what do you mean? If you mean the Israel-Palestine conflict, then I believe it's because, as you said, he read a lot about it and is... Yes. I guess I'm gonna repeatedly respond to the Israel-Palestine thing. He read a lot about it, and he seems knowledgeable about it. He's the only one in the Destiny sphere that pretends to be intelligent. Interesting. Okay, just asking. Okay, let's continue.
By protesters successfully. I don't think that's ever been shown. I think maybe in Nitsana there was a couple of instances where they were held up for a few hours, but that was when there was already a bottleneck at Rafah. So even if they...
I mean, we all have our biases. The question is if these biases get in the way of analyzing a situation or not. We all have our biases, whether we like it or not.
got through Nitsana at that time, they would have just gone to the back of a queue in Rafah for the Egyptians. So I don't think protesters have actually successfully stopped any aid from reaching anyone. As for the government...
Well, we also have the fact that Israel has been bombing aid workers, no? Very infamously, a Polish aid worker that has been working all around the world has been killed very recently. And there's been a whole increased tension between Israel and Poland because of that. So there are many aspects to this when it comes to aid. And the delivery of aid is actually being made a lot more difficult because of the other factors that we can list, the destruction of the infrastructure, the lack of electricity and water, etc. So it's all intertwined. These are not separate, isolated things that we should look at separately. We have to look at all of them, and we have to look at what's the interplay between them, how they interact with one another, how they, how it all works together, not just the individual parts.
I don't know, you can tell me, because as far as Kerem
If you don't do that, then the whole analysis is pretty lacking, in my opinion.
And Rafah goes, is there any particular difference between the way that the Egyptians and the Israelis are processing aid to the border?
I mean, I don't know specifically about that border crossing. All I know is the, like I said, the example of the British Foreign Secretary privately saying that he had that the Israeli government had stopped British shipments from getting in. To the degree to which that's happened, I don't know. But again, I don't think for the purposes of our discussion... Now, look, obviously, the ICJ, you would need to go into a lot more detail. But for the purposes of this discussion, I think that's enough to suggest that the Israeli government are happy to look upon the starvation of the Palestinian people and think, fuck it, we can make that worse.
No,
Again,
I don't think that's
rather...
sufficient at all. I think a statement from an official saying that an unspecified number of trucks were turned back, even though no one denies that. Everyone will say that trucks have been turned back for one reason or the other.
So we know that the largest, I think I'm right in saying the largest calorific.
And since I don't have the data, I don't have all the information, I will not focus on that, but I will focus sort of on more broader things, like the fact that we should not be looking at these things individually in isolation, but we should be looking at how these things sort of interact, how they influence one another, and what sort of bigger picture they create. It is necessary, at least at some point, to look at it that way. Because those things don't work neatly in isolation.
In modern history, certainly since records of this sort of thing began, which is apparently the case in Gaza, is being exacerbated. To what degree, again, we can argue, but as being exacerbated by the Israeli government purposely turning away aid trucks. Does that not suggest to you that they're at least passively okay with the starvation of Palestinians?
Well, no, because Egypt has turned back trucks as well. It only seems to be 1.5%. Is there any indication that there's not enough trucks?
I would argue that Egypt is complicit in this genocide too, by the way.
Okay, that's fine. So I'm just wondering then, is there any indication that there's not enough trucks getting through these crossings?
And also, keep in mind that aid that gets into Gaza, we have cases of aid workers getting killed as well, which scares away aid from going to Gaza.
There's not enough fucking trucks going in there.
Do they?
Yeah, is there anyone claiming that enough aid is reaching the people of Gaza by these?
No. Reaching the people is different, but we're talking about the crossings. We're talking about Israel's policies of the crossings. Obviously, distribution is a different question because
not even
some
just
places
distribution. Like this, it's not even just distribution.
Okay.
There isn't enough going in there. Even if it was distributed entirely fairly, we know that the calorific needs of that amount of people is not being met.
How do we know that?
What do you mean, how? Because we know what the calorific intake of the population that roughly is there, and we know that not enough is getting in there.
No, but
that's why everyone keeps saying we need more fucking aid trucks going in there.
No, I know. Some people are saying they need more trucks, but is there like a particular number we're talking about, or like what have they?
Isn't there worrying about an imminent famine in the Gaza Strip, or am I totally off base with this?
I don't know what the exact number is off the top of my head.
Because my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that before the war, the average number of food trucks that went into Gaza daily was about 70 for food trucks, and now it's like 150. So, and that's also, I think, that would also include internal production in Gaza, made up between sort of 27 and 33% of their food production, and some of that was for export. So even if you account for that, it's like there's currently more food trucks going than pre-war, plus also internal production. So it's made up for both plus extra. So that's why I'd be curious to see where people are saying there's not enough trucks entering the strip.
Apologies, I'm just reading a thing here. Someone sent me the link for the 14,000. Oh, that's the 1.5% of trucks were refused. Okay, sorry. Yeah, apologies. I've been sent the links. That's always part of the problem with this. Is it's such a fucking complicated issue that it's a lot of the details are very, very difficult to parse out.
I can just be candid as well. The reason I'm focusing on details is because I feel like a lot of these bullet points that people give are either based on disinformation or incomplete information that actually changes
on details.
the story.
It's
That's why I think
again, it's isolating certain parts and not looking how they interact with one another, which I think is a mistake in a discussion like this. You can focus on the details, but you also have to focus on the broader picture at some point.
What I hear from trucks is like you have people saying there were 500 trucks. We need 500 trucks going in. But it turns out that 500 trucks has never been the case. Definitely not for...
So the question is, what happens to the trucks while they're in Gaza, etc., etc. It's like, again, it's not all... You just can't do that. You have to look at all the variables.
Food. 500 trucks accounted for everything, like construction materials and all that shit that's obviously not going in now. So that's why I think it's like...
The important thing is the result. Is the food getting to the people that need the food? That's the important part.
Important to look at these details because, like...
Okay, that's fine, but I think we're all dealing with incomplete information to a degree.
Yeah, but that's why I'm saying when you're claiming that the Israeli government is like satisfied or like they want to starve the population, then I feel like that one needs a bit of substantiation. I mean, so far, the number of trucks going in doesn't provide evidence for that at all. It feels like there are definitely enough trucks going in there.
Going back to the quotes, we've seen rhetoric from some of them that suggests that they're perfectly fine with the starvation and hunger of the Palestinian people on the basis that they want their hostages back, even though, of course, when 3 of them were released, they were fucking killed by the Israeli defense forces, which is fascinating. And of course, starving the Palestinians means starving the fucking hostages as well. So that's counterproductive in an enormous way.
Yeah, of course it is. But that's why rhetoric and actions matter. Because when Gallant says there will be no food, meanwhile there are more food trucks going into Gaza than there were pre-war, almost double actually. Then it's like, well, okay, maybe he said
this. That's because the world's
happened.
Watching now. Yeah, that's the world is watching now.
Yeah, well, that matters if the world's watching.
Well,
if
because
they're
Israel
changing,
overplayed its fucking hand.
yeah,
That's
so if they're
why.
changing their actions, first of all, like, I don't know at what point there ever was no food going in. I think in October there was a drop because border crossings were having to like
I didn't
arrange for
say no
imports.
food was going in.
Yeah, but that's
At
the
no
point.
point
That's
did
what
I
I'm
say
saying
no
is
food
like
was
that's
going
what
in.
I'm saying is that like there doesn't seem to be the case that even though there's this quote of Gallant saying no food, we're fighting human animals, but then you see on the ground that Israel is actually allowing more than enough food to actually cross the border.
Well, I guess my question would be what happens to the food after it crosses the border? Because just crossing it, the border does not satisfy me per se. What if it gets past the border, which, for the record, I'm not saying that it's happening. I'm giving you an example of a possible situation. But what if the trucks cross the border and then all the food gets destroyed because Gaza keeps being bombed? What then? Suddenly it doesn't matter how many trucks cross the border if the food doesn't really get to anyone. So I guess we have to you have to go a bit further in these sort of analyses now. Like you have to see if the food actually reaches the designated target population, no? You can just look at how many trucks pass the border and say, there you go. Trucks pass the border, therefore everything's okay. If that makes sense. There are many little factors at play here now. And of course, I'm not making one statement. I'm not making a statement in one direction or the other, but it's perfectly plausible that while the trucks are being allowed to pass, the food itself is not allowed to reach the population that it's supposed to reach. No? Is that an unreasonable worry on my part?
Then it seems to be the case that they're not following through on this idea of like starving the population at any point. So it's not just
because the world changed. Well, because the world changed its opinion based upon the overplaying of the hand of Israel. When Israel first suggested cutting off internet and water and electricity and blah blah blah, the world was fine with that. Every world leader said, "Yay, fantastic!" And it wasn't until Israel started doing what it's doing, killing tens of thousands of people, and the opinion in those countries shifted, that all of a sudden that becomes quite such a rhetorically acceptable line anymore. It's not Israel out the goodness of its heart saving the Palestinians, is it?
Oh, I don't. It doesn't matter why they're doing it. It just matters like if you're saying that they're changing their act.
Fine,
Like,
considering
I contested
intent,
this.
considering intent,
Yeah, well, I think
one of the core parts of the Genocide Convention. I would argue the reason that anything is happening is precisely the point, isn't it? They're not doing this because they want Palestinians not to die, or because they love Palestinians. They want to fucking save them. It's because the world said no to this shit.
No, but I think but you're saying they changed something, but I don't know if the policy on letting food trucks into Gaza has changed at all. Really, it seems that they're doing what they were doing in October. I think there was a drop in October because obviously that was like when the war started and a bunch of border crossings were destroyed, and that obviously had to be the arrangement of humanitarian aid to go in those particular places. But I don't think they changed their policy on not allowing food into Gaza ever. It seemed to be that they were never acting in a way that you would if you wanted to starve out the population.
Again, what happened to the aid and to the food, etc., once in Gaza? That is my also question.
Okay, so has there never been a calorific
Why does Gaza need food trucks to begin with? Is the real question.
deficit at any point in the last 6 months in Palestine? Or let's say in Gaza.
Oh, there are deficits in certain areas, but that's a question of distribution, not a question of Israel letting aid trucks into the strip, which was the initial claim.
Okay, but what part of...
Well, the distribution itself is also an important question, because the distribution can be hampered, for example, by Israel bombing Gaza, right? That is not an insignificant factor in all of this.
Does any part of the country that Israel currently controls have any calorific deficit that it could be doing more about?
I almost 100% agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, so at least in part, they are fine with using hunger or allowing hunger within a controlled area that it controls and that no one else can get food into.
Yes.
as well as, of course, the purposeful targeting of certain aid workers. We've seen huge numbers.
Yeah, that's true. Aid workers have been targeted, although I assume Lonerbox will. Um, I assume Lonerbox will challenge on whether or not it's purposeful, but there has been a lot of scandal surrounding the killing of aid workers recently. Certainly.
Of aid workers that have been killed during this. Again, some of them you can write off as an accident. I don't think you can write all of them off as an accident.
So I don't know.
I think they wish to scare international workers away from this.
So now it seems to be.
That is true. Aid workers have been reluctant of coming to Gaza over this.
Like they are. So now it seems to be like they're allowing enough food to get into the strip, but they're intentionally not distributing it effective, or not allowing it to be distributed effectively enough in an area that is.
Well, they are effectively the government in large parts.
No, I know. So that's why I agree with the ICJ giving those provisional measures, because as the occupier, you are legally supposed to facilitate aid moving in. But again, it's like I don't really know what the difference is between what's happening now and the best that they could do, because North Gaza is a absolute mess right now. It's like there's like gang warfare is starting to crop up.
Well, why is it a mess? That's the main question, right? What caused it to be a mess? Again, that is why you cannot just look at things in isolation. You have to look at all the parts and how they connect together. Why is Gaza a mess?
An issue of just like the fact that the border crossings that are currently functional are both in the south. I think Israel's already opening, or they're said to be opening one in Erez. There's the American port that's going in right now. So again, I don't really know if any of this is indication of like intentionally wanting to starve the population. I guess that's probably why. I don't even know. When was the last time the health ministry reported a death of starvation? I thought it was like 50 days ago by now.
I don't know, but I mean, again, you're dancing on the head of a pin on this is slightly mind-boggling, because I know you're not a Zionist, so you don't need to be doing this. I don't know why you're taking this odd rhetorical line about it. You can say that they're passively allowing people to go hungry, but I don't see that that's morally any better. Like, it might play at the ICJ, I guess. Like, they could try that tactic, but I don't see that's going to work.
I feel like you're starting with an extreme claim, and then we start to look at a bit of the nuances of it, and then you kind of just like want to massage the original claim to make it fit whatever.
I'm not sure if the nuances are actually being looked at, because if you cannot analyze how the individual parts interact with one another, then you're not really having a nuanced take. You're isolating the parts and sort of doing a reductive analysis almost.
Thing we're at, because I think you started with talking about aid getting blocked at the border or getting turned back and all that, but now it seems like
that wasn't even about the Israeli government. No, I'm not giving that up at all. I was arguing that the radicalization of the Israeli people has led to things like protesters trying to block trucks at the border. That wasn't even about the Israeli government.
Okay, but
that was about I was making a broader point about the radicalization of the Israeli people, who, like I say, if you look at
hello, murder birder,
the polling of the Israeli people, it's pretty fucking worrying, actually. A great majority of them don't think the IDF has gone far enough, and they're pretty much the only country in the world who think that.
So when you spoke about radicalization of Israelis, you were using it in aid of the idea that the government or that the leaders have radicalized them into a genocidal mindset. And then I was thinking, well, that clearly can be the case for this particular example, because it seems to be that the protesters who went to block those trucks had the shit beaten out of them by the IDF, and they had a military zone drawn up around that area to keep those protesters out, and it doesn't seem like those protesters actually achieved anything. So yeah.
Well, Hasidic Jews who have campaigned against the actions of the Israeli government have also been beaten the shit out by the IDF. It does seem that the IDF are rather fond of beating up Jewish people as well.
Wait, was that a pivot, do you think?
A bit, yeah. It was a bit of a pivot.
Well, no, it's
or a non sequitur, I guess.
taking the seriousness of your point as seriously as I think it deserved to be taken. The IDF are, by their very nature, a violent and despicable group. In fact, they beat up some Jewish people. I mean, that's what they do. They're a violent group.
Okay, but then it just seems
Sure, but it's the idea of being a violent group is not necessarily connected to the claim of genocide, because the IDF can be a violent group and can be committing crimes, can be committing war crimes even, but that alone is not enough to sort of demonstrate that there's a genocide happening. See, I'm sort of looking at what responses can be made to stuff like that, right?
like the claim that you made that you don't really care about.
You cannot put out isolated claims, because you can counter them with saying, well, this isolated claim, while it sort of can constitute a war crime, it does not follow that it constitutes a genocide. That needs to be sort of established.
Each of these individual arguments, because the claim was
Well,
that
no,
the
because
government's
each individual,
radicalizing.
you can try and pick holes in each individual part, right? My point is that if you take all of this in the round, there is a context behind all of it, because it all happens. Nothing happens in abstract.
Mm-hmm.
There is an attitude of genocide.
Although so far, this conversation has been assuming that many things are happening in a vacuum, and there have been no comparing, no analyzing, and as to how these pieces work together.
Intent from Israeli leaders, from both the political and military wing, and that they are enacting, at least in part, some of that, seeing how far they can go with it, and with the wish, hopefully, to have settlements in the north of Gaza at the very least. That's what I think is taking place right now. Now, can I prove that in the court of law? I'm not a fucking lawyer, so, I mean, no. Is ultimately the fucking point. Hopefully in South Africa can, but I don't know.
I feel like, I don't know if you're. Does it really feel like I'm poking holes if we're just focusing on particular things? I feel like we kind of have to look, because
Well, you, on the one hand, you have to focus on particular things, but you also have to look at how these particular things work in tandem with other particular things, and then other particular things, and how they affect one another. You cannot avoid that. You cannot just throw that aspect away, that certain particular things affect other particular things and vice versa, and then work together and create a bigger sort of thing. You cannot avoid discussing that aspect of it.
yeah, this is how I see it. I feel like you're showing me a forest, and as soon as we start looking at a few of the trees, they're not quite what you say they are.
I think you've got a set of, let's say, pre-prepared positions that you're not even remotely going to examine. You've got your set opinion that you think it's X thing, and that you're just going to stick to that. It feels like I'm talking to a wall, frankly.
Do you want to try another example? I think you spoke about distinction, or
well, I mean, the point I made about the fact that they are treating everyone within the certain age range. I think, like I say, I think it's 16 to 45 or something like that. As all being enemy combatants if they happen to be within a certain area, which they're not even told that's the certain area. So yeah, I would argue in that case, if you're killing everyone, or potentially killing everyone in that area, and calling them all terrorists, even though you have no evidence that these people are fucking terrorists in many cases, I would argue that's not you drawing a distinction between civilians and active combatants in a war zone.
If we're talking about distinction, then according to Hamas, their own numbers, they've got like what, 30,000 fighters, and they said that the IDF had killed like 6,000 of them, right?
Okay, yeah, that's possible.
Israel said that they killed 12, 13,000. And this is when the death toll was just under 30,000 total.
Right.
So it seems like, I don't know what the argument against this is. You can tell me. That would mean that Israel has killed, according to Hamas's numbers, Israel has killed 20% of the Al Qassam brigades, 20% of the Hamas forces.
Okay.
And as for the civilian population death, that would be like, I think 25,000 out of 2.2 million would be like 1%, maybe a bit over.
This is the danger of treating people like numbers. Like, I think this sort of discussion, this sort of armchair discussing these sort of topics, like, that is the problem of it. People are not numbers. People are not mathematics. Like, how much percentage of the population is acceptable to kill in comparison to the percentage killed of our target? I don't think that is the level of analysis we should be engaging in, to be quite frank. I think any number of killed civilians should be an unacceptable number, quite frankly. Like, you should adjust your operation to minimize the amount of civilian casualties. The question should not be what is the maximum amount of civilian casualties you can get away with for it to be still acceptable as compared to the amount of your enemies killed. The question should be, how do I keep that number lower and then lower and then lower? And how do we adjust our operations to keep those numbers at a minimum? No? It shouldn't be how much we can get away with as long as we kill our enemies. That is a flawed way of looking at this, in my opinion. In my opinion, I may be just a naive person here, but that is how I see it, at least. Maybe that's a very naive way of looking at the world, but hey.
So if they're
Okay.
killing 20% at least, maybe 40 of Hamas's,
Like, it shouldn't be, if we're killing 20% here, then surely we can get away with killing 1% of the civilian population, right? That should not be the calculus.
military, but 1% of the civilian population. Doesn't that seem like they're targeting Hamas?
Okay, but I mean that's a very interesting way of statistically analysing that. You could also argue that they're killing X number of civilians for every enemy combatant, and that what's the acceptable ratio of innocents to military combatants?
Yeah, that would be
You know what I mean? Like,
but then the problem with just using civilians to combatants is that, like, imagine there was a city with 100 people and 10% of them were militants and 90% of them were civilians, and you indiscriminately bombed the whole place and you got an equal
The
number.
problem is that you should not indiscriminately bomb the whole place. That is the whole issue here, I would argue.
Then it would look like you indiscriminately bombed, because
Well, yeah, if you indiscriminately bomb, it certainly looks like you indiscriminately bombed. You just describe it as indiscriminately bombing. Like, this is a very strange example. I have to listen to this again. That was a very clumsy example, I have to say.
and 90% of them were civilians, and you indiscriminately bombed the whole place, and you got an equal number, then it would look like you indiscriminately bombed.
Yes. If you indiscriminately bomb the whole place, it will certainly look like you've indiscriminately bombed. I'm not sure what case is being made here. I'm not sure what point is being made here. Yes, if you've indiscriminately bombed a place, it will in fact look like you've indiscriminately bombed a place. That is a very strange example, and I'm not sure what point is being made here.
Because
that was very clumsy wording. If there are 10 militants and 90 non-militants, and the whole place is bombed indiscriminately, it might be seeing as the place being bombed in the what?
It would just look bad.
Am I too stupid to understand what point is being made here? Am I just too stupid for this example?
You got 9-to-1 ratio of civilians to combatants.
Am I just too malnourished due to lack of donations?
But if you did the exact same bombing campaign in a city that was 90% militants and 10% civilians, you'd get a really good ratio, even though if you just indiscriminately...
Why is the answer no matter what the ratio is? Okay, I guess I will ask this. Without making any assumptions, without making any judgments one way or the other. Why is the answer no matter what the ratio is, always indiscriminate bombing? Why is the only answer always bombing? Are there no other ways of targeting your targets? Is bombing the only tool available? I guess that's my question.
bombed. So I think just civilian to combatant ratio doesn't necessarily tell you that much about the intent of the people doing the strikes. That's why I think proportion of each group is probably a bit...
It does, actually. You've just demonstrated it from your examples. If you know that there are a lot more civilians than combatants, and still you just choose to indiscriminately bomb, then doesn't it indicate a certain level of intent there? Like, indiscriminately bombing is not the only tool at your disposal. That's a very strong assumption to make, that no matter what the ratio is, the only thing you can do is just indiscriminately bomb and hope for the best. And there's never any intent behind that. That indiscriminately bombing is just this neutral thing that you just always do.
bit more of a nuanced way to look at it, because...
How is it nuanced? It's not nuanced. Assuming that you always just have to bomb everything, no matter what the ratio. That's not nuanced at all. That's actually very strangely simplistic and flattening. Again, am I too stupid to see something that I'm not seeing?
Okay, but what's the percentage overall of Hamas? Certainly, let's say Hamas within the targeted areas as well, because I don't think you can take the entire thing, because they haven't literally bombed every fucking inch of the place.
Well, you can if you remember that Israel can bomb all of Gaza. So for all of Gaza, it can count, right, because Israel could target all of it, right?
It's not going to bomb like the fucking desert or something, is it?
But we're just talking about the population within the strip. It's not just like we're not talking about square kilometers. We're just talking about the population in the strip. And the population in the strip is about 2.1, 2.2 million. And the Hamas population is 30,000. So that's why I would say it sounds like they're bombing targets where there is Hamas, because that's why the ratio of Hamas deaths is so much higher than the ratio of civilian deaths. Because
right, but we know that Hamas operates in these areas. Yes, it's that Israel, at the very least, doesn't care whether it's killing civilians. And like I say, the fact that they're literally saying that, it's impossible to even know what the overall percentage of the numbers of terrorists that Israel claims to have killed are actually terrorists. That would be really interesting to know that. Because they're targeting these specific areas and saying that everyone within inside that area is a legitimate combatant, even though they just happen to fucking live there and be there, which again is their legal fucking right under international law. It suggests to me, at the very least, an incredibly laissez-faire attitude towards the killing of civilians.
So that's,
you know what I mean?
I'm going to admit I don't really know enough about the kill zone thing. We can maybe revisit that another day if you want to, because that's just on my list and I haven't reached it yet.
Okay.
But when we're talking about the fact that they don't care, this is an argument that I made since the beginning, is that it does seem very much like Israel has this military goal, but they're willing to accept fairly high levels of collateral damage in order to achieve it. For example, NATO has a set number of civilians per category of target. So they'll say like a really high up commander might be worth like 10 or 15 collateral deaths. Bin Laden was worth 30, I think, to the United States at one point. Some people are just worth, like small time people are worth nothing. Like middle of the ground might be worth 5, or pieces of like equipment might be worth 5 civilian deaths. And it seems to be with Israel that they are, based on the Jabalia strikes, I thought that they were much more accepting of high collateral numbers, that they were willing to take out like 40 or 50 people for what seemed to be a couple of, like a commander, their escort of like 10, 15 people, and then like a couple of tunnels. That seemed quite high to me. To say whether or not it's illegal in terms of proportionality, I don't know. But like,
that's a bloodbath.
Yeah, so whether or not
fucking civilians for one dude, that's a bloodbath.
No, it wasn't for one dude. It was for a dude, and it was for the one commander plus troops who were escorting him plus tunnels. So it was like a multitude of things. Again, I still think for NATO, they would just say, we'll make the collateral acceptance the value of the highest target. So we'll just say, even though it's a commander, an escort, and tunnels, well, we'll just find out whatever the collateral number is for commanders. For Israel, it sounds like they're taking each value and adding them up. I don't know if that's illegal under international law. You're not really expected to have any cap when it comes to, you're just supposed to show that whatever military gain versus collateral death. But that I argue, and this is an argument I've made for a while, is that I think it wouldn't be too difficult to accuse Israel of committing war crimes, especially if they're
now the argument has arrived. The argument that I've been saying for a while now that Lonerbox could use, that he could say, yes, I agree that Israel is committing war crimes and that there should be consequences, but you have to establish that those war crimes are genocide in particular. And I assume that is what is about to happen right now.
Pursuing that with recklessness, like an intentional willingness to be reckless when it comes to civilian casualties. I've made that argument since before October 7th, that recklessness is how they tend to act. So they are disproportionate. So, but I don't think that constitutes genocide. That's the claim I'm making.
In all honesty,
see, I knew this would be, and that is like this is where Kevin Logan has to say, okay, then let's look at the war crimes and see.
I'm getting the impression. Oh God, I don't want to fall out over this. I really don't. But it seems to me that you almost get it, but you stop short on the basis of the kind of optics cooking, I guess, is the phrase that sometimes gets used, rather unfortunately. That you don't want to be extremist in lib circles or whatever. You don't want to be that person, and so you're not prepared to use the G word.
Have I demonstrated any like lack of facts or understanding or anything throughout this conversation? Or
no, but you can. I mean, in ultimately, because there's been no legal ruling on this, and there very probably won't be. I doubt any of the Israeli leaders will ever face any fucking justice for their crimes. We can't say in a legal sense definitively whether they have or haven't done X, Y, and Z. So this is just a conversation between two dickheads on the internet at the end of the day.
True.
So you can spin facts however you damn well please. Zionist propagandists do it every fucking day, and that's, by the way, not me accusing you of that. I'm just saying people do it every day. And they've done it, unfortunately, rather effectively for a great deal of time. So, in terms of facts, however, I'm sure many of the things you've said have been factually correct. I'd have to check some of them.
I guess this debate is coming to an end.
And I will go back and check, after we finish with this, the claims that you've made. Because, again, you've brought up things that I'm not necessarily aware of. And you've asked questions that I don't have answers to at the moment. So, I don't think you're a fucking liar or a piece of shit or anything like that. I just think there's a lack of a certain empathy on your part. I think you're prepared to dance on the head of a pin over minor details of like fucking evil. Like it just seems really odd to me that that's the rhetorical strategy you've taken.
I mean, the obvious retort to this would be, I'm not doing that. I'm just trying to be specific about what sort of crime we're dealing with here. Are we dealing with this sort of war crime? Are we dealing with that sort of war crime? Or are we dealing with genocide? That would be the very obvious and easy thing that Lonerbox could answer this one with, if he so chose.
I don't think the contentions are as minor. Like, I think if the initial claim is that, for example, like with the starvation thing, even though it seems to be that a lot of the claims that surround that are just like factually incorrect, then I think it's worth pointing out that they're
Because since if Lonerbox agrees that war crimes are happening, then from his perspective, if it's a matter of pinpointing what sort of war crime you're dealing with, I guess.
factually incorrect. But as far as the genocide, I don't need a court to tell me that there's a genocide happening. I think it's quite clear. I think it's quite easy to see how what China's doing to the Uyghurs to fall under the Genocide Convention because of that Part E or D, is it, imposing measures to prevent births because they, at least according to the allegations, mass sterilized like 2 million people or whatever. It's like, okay, well, why did you do that? That's like a very open and shut one, I think. But when it comes to what's happening here, like I just don't. I don't think this looks.
I still think there is a case to be made when you put certain things together, when you sort of not look at them individually, but look at how they work together. That there's still a point to the claim that there's an environment being created that makes it impossible for the Gaza citizens to live. And that has not really been explored fully.
Any other genocide that's happened in history, I don't think. I think if Israel wanted,
every genocide is unique, so that's not really an argument.
To commit a genocide,
well,
then the actions would be
really
very different. Like,
each genocide has its own peculiarities. I mean, for instance,
there you go. Kevin Logan said it.
Famously, of course, people bring up the Holocaust in this discussion rather a lot. Sometimes not very fairly, sometimes rather crassly. But that itself is the only industrialized slaughter. It doesn't look like a great many of the genocides in history either. It stands alone in its scale and...
True. It is in fact very distinct. Some people claim that it cannot be compared to any other genocide, that it shouldn't be.
Technical aspects and all the rest of it, but it's still clearly a genocide and one of the most obvious genocides that's ever occurred.
Yeah,
so
because
just
in
saying
terms of
this doesn't look like others doesn't mean anything.
No, but I mean
it could be a complete freak occurrence type genocide, but it could still be a genocide.
But I mean, this one doesn't look like a genocide because they seem to be taking so many measures that go against it. Like, for example, when one side's saying they're intentionally starving the population, but then the facts actually show that they're allowing more food into the strip than has ever gone into Gaza ever, arguably.
Well, that's not exactly... Again, you cannot just look at these things in isolation. The question is the food reaching the people?
Then I'm like, well, okay, that just seems to completely clash. Or when people say that they're not adhering to the principle of distinction, but then it seems to be like they've taken out at least 20, possibly 40, 45% of Hamas's military population and only 1% of the civilian population, seems to be that their targets are Hamas. Or when people...
Well, that could just indicate that there are less Hamas people than civilians, no?
Look at some of these quotes and I go and I look at the full quote
well,
and I see in the paragraph
I'm not sure about the whole percentage thing, to be quite honest.
Areas in
Hamas. So it's like
they're targeting areas in which Hamas
like an easy retort would be that, and I'm not sure what response for that would be, that Israel killed a bunch of civilians and just happened to kill a big amount of Hamas fighters as well. That alone does not mean anything, does it? Correlation does not equal causation, does it? Isn't that a pretty basic thing?
Operate. I don't think they give two fucks about the fact that they're going to kill lots of civilians as well. Now, that of course will lead to the charge of human shields, etc. But again, if you're going to label every single person in that area as a terrorist, then you're essentially saying anyone in that area is fair game.
So if
which
you're
is
saying that
indistinct.
if you're saying that they're targeting Hamas, but they just don't care about collateral that comes alongside it, right? That would not be genocide by any.
No, but I'm
understanding
saying
of
they
it. Like,
clarify. They specifically say anyone in that kill area is terrorist.
Yeah, I would need
again,
We
to-
could very well frame it as they just kill civilians, and if a lot of Hamas people die along the way, it's great. No?
not
revisit the-
distinguishing.
I'd read to revisit the kill
Yeah,
area.
and I would
because if
argue
it's-
that
yeah.
you ought to, because I think that's a rather important point in this, because that is literally not drawing a distinction between civilians and active combatants. That's not just collateral damage, that's essentially fucking murder.
So what's the sorry? Just out of interest, what's the claim is that they went into a particular area that wasn't specified to the Palestinians, and they killed any male between what, like 16 and 45 or something?
Yes, I'll get the link for you when we're done, because we're basically, I think we're running out of steam here. But I'll get the link for you. It's in the fucking database thing. The kill area thing, which I mean you could probably find a lot of the information yourself, but I will send that to you when we're done. Yeah.
Because I can see Haaretz, and then everyone else talking about it is what you got: Al Jazeera, New Arab, TRT, World Middle East Eye. What was this? Was this based on an interview? Was this based on IDF documents, or was this based on like someone said it, or what's this based on?
I think it was IDF documents. It was the numbers that they had revealed themselves. Yeah, so that's what they were targeting. I'd have to get the link up for you. But again, you can.
Yeah, we can revisit that one another time. Like if they've done that, that would be definitely like a example of a war crime or a crime against humanity. Whether it would constitute genocide, I still don't think so, because
There you go. There's the argument that I've been saying for the longest time that would be employed. Whether or not rightfully or not is a different matter altogether.
So you're never going to
depending on-
accept it, then? You just again, I'm talking to a wall. Man.
no,
It's a
it's
shame.
because I don't think, like, you understand there's a reason that people don't call Dresden genocide, right? Even though they were basically killing
some
fucking
people
whoever.
do actually. Some people do actually.
Okay, like any like,
There's an argument.
are there historians or
I think
any like
there's an
serious
argument to
people
be
who say
made.
that, or what?
Yeah, no, there are serious historians who claim that. Yeah, I think so. And to be honest, there's an argument. I mean, it's nuanced and everyone involved is dead, so it's not really fucking relevant anymore. But I think there's an argument to be made that the targeting of certain cities, especially by Obama Harris, who specifically said that he wasn't interested in necessarily shortening the war, but he wanted to kill lots of Germans. I think there's an argument to be made there that there was that did constitute in some respects genocide. Yes.
I don't
Not
think
necessarily by everyone involved, but it's there's like it would be
I
an
mean, it could fit potentially under the destruction of a group in part.
interesting legal case, if nothing else, because they targeted cities specifically to kill people. They were trying to smash cities rather than necessarily like military targets or whatever, which again would fall under the same basic principle here of it not distinguishing between civilians and enemy combatants. Now, did international law exist on that basis then? No. So you couldn't really try them under genocide law because it didn't exist.
That's true. Also, that's why the Germans were never tried for killing German Jewish people, because they were considered basically it was considered the internal affair of the German state.
But again, you
don't need the law again, because obviously the Holocaust came in before the Genocide Convention. Armenia was before the
exactly,
convention.
yeah.
Yeah, but nobody was caught. Like, you also have to remember that law, and that is the most basic principle of law. Law does not work in retrospect. So nobody was ever tried for the Holocaust, per se. They were tried for individual war crimes, but nobody was tried for the Holocaust, per se.
Either way, it would be an interesting side.
Well, it always comes up in this. I mean, all sorts of things come up. The Armenian genocide. I'm fine with comparing various genocides, not necessarily recent ones. That is the one that many people are familiar with.
The same actually is true to a degree with the dropping of the atomic bomb. There are some people who would claim that to be genocide as well.
Yeah, I'd like to know which historians make that claim, but I don't think I've I know people in people in different parts of the humanities might say it, but I don't think I've ever heard it come from like based under the convention. I don't think I've heard that.
Well, whether we
And
run
keep
the
in mind, the convention is already limited as it is.
convention, I guess. And yeah, I get the part of the problem, of course, as we I think pointed out at the start, wasn't it, that that Lemkin himself, the guy who literally coined the term, didn't think that the UN definition was broad enough. Didn't think it.
Well, it wasn't that he didn't think that the definition was broad enough. It was that certain parties, certain states interested in narrowing it, protested and caused it to be narrowed because they themselves took part in certain actions that if the definition was not narrowed, they would fall under it. That is what happened.
Included enough of the aspects of what he considered to be genocide.
Yeah, and the problem is we can't really do much with that because unfortunately, since his one wasn't taken, there's no precedent for it. So we don't like when it comes to the current convention, we know what they mean by bodily or mental harm. It's basically always used in reference to like rape as a means of or torture as a means of like literally making it impossible for them to live a meaningful life going forward and shit like that. So yeah,
nice. Okay, that's an interesting point. Would the stories of the mistreatment of Palestinian civilians, would that be at least admissible as part of the case in your eyes?
If there was like an IDF unit like raping people, or
well, there's been stories that are coming out of Palestinians who've been released who've been certainly claimed to have been sexually assaulted. I can't prove.
Yeah, so I know I've seen from the UN that the claims against them is like prolonged forced nudity and humiliation, or like invasive searches and stuff like that. Genocide, no, but abusive.
Wait, hold on. Was that on my end? Oh, thank you. Thank you, Bleak182, for the subscription. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. A new giggler in the fold. Thank you.
Atrocious, yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay. Okay, on that note, I think we'll, unless you've got anything further to say or ask or whatever, I think we'll step back from this because I'm on the verge of fucking going mental, frankly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shit.
Well, this conversation has been dispiriting, in all honesty. This has been really fucking depressing.
Okay.
I mean, that will never happen.
Yeah. Everyone go and check out Lonerbox's stuff.
Okay. Take care, man.
Bye-bye.
I feel like I'm I feel like I'm dealing with a lot of this. Let me draw it for you guys. I feel like I'm getting a lot of I
might add some information in the process of editing.
It's a genocide because of X. And I'm like, it doesn't really look that much like X. It looks more like Y. And then they're like, oh, but that's still bad. Why are you splitting hairs? I'm like, okay, whatever.
I think saying it's genocide because of X is a mistake to begin with. You cannot do that. You have to say it's genocide, and I'm not saying like I'm giving an abstract example here. It's genocide because A, B, C, D, and A, B, C, D work together like this. They affect each other in this and this and that way. Together they create this picture of E, and that E is you cannot take one thing in isolation and say genocide because of X, you know? That's never how that works. You have several factors that work in tandem that influence one another, etc. Does that make sense? You always have several factors that you have to take together and analyze. And then you can make this sort of judgment / analysis of whether or not it's genocide. So I guess that's it. I guess that's the debate. We've done it. We've watched it. I've done my own sort of analysis of the situation. I've done my own inquiry into what was being said. I hope you've sort of enjoyed what you've seen here. And if you have enjoyed it, then consider subscribing, liking, hitting the bell, and, supporting your favorite streamer. Right? Right? Okay, so now I guess since we've done the number one thing from today's stream, bucket list. I like how you did a debate where you can predict what they will say. Wait, are you saying I predicted what they would say? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So do you think I did well with the whole thing? Because if so, then join the page and show appreciation.